Welcome to the Rollup. Today's episode is with Sam, the founder of Frax, and today we talk about everything in the Frax ecosystem, from the Frax stablecoin and why it is built as the best M2 money on the market today, all the way through to Fraxtal, the new modular L2 home to the billions of dollars in the Frax ecosystem. We talk about Sam's broader vision of fractal scalability and the app chain lifecycle of how applications graduate from smart contracts to their own app chains. This is the Rollup. Enjoy today's episode with Sam, the founder of Frax. Before we get to today's video, please enjoy a word from our sponsors that help make the Rollup possible. Cartesia is your home for app-specific rollups. At the forefront of developing new tools and platforms that enhance the capabilities of blockchain technology, Cartesia enables applications that are flexible and built to scale. Build on a full Linux environment and use traditional software libraries, but in blockchain development. Go to cartesia.io, that's cartesia.io, to learn more about building your own app chain today. Fuel achieves higher throughput by utilizing a novel UTXO-based approach that allows for parallelized execution. This design significantly accelerates transaction processing, which enables Fuel to handle vastly more transactions than non-parallelized systems. Thanks to advancements introduced by Fuel, Ethereum rollups are set to be more powerful than ever before. And Fuel is not just enhancing Ethereum rollups, it's redefining them, making them faster, more scalable, and more adaptable to meet the needs of modern applications and developers. Go to fuel.network, that's fuel.network, to learn how to build on the Rollup OS.
Welcome back to the Rollup. Today we have an episode about another modular player, our friend Sam. I think we did an episode with Sam, maybe one of our first 30 podcasts back in 2020. In like the end of DeFi summer, I think. So good to have Sam back. Of course, here with Rob. I know Rob's pretty excited about some of the fractal scaling that you're doing, Sam. And yeah, you guys have had quite the journey in DeFi, now all the way to launching Fraxtal, your own L2, amongst other really cool stuff that we'll dive into. So welcome in, Sam. It's a pleasure to have you back on, man.
Awesome to be back, guys. It's been a while. Really excited to talk about all the stuff we're building at Frax. Like you guys said, there's a lot of stuff since the last time we talked. Frax has grown a ton, and recently we issued our modular rollup mainnet, and a lot of stuff going on with that as well.
There's so many different places where we could dive in. I think let's start from the beginning. Like, tell us, kind of like the prehistory of Frax, the chronological, going all the way through when you guys launched. Just kind of getting us caught up on like what the last, the recent history has been for Frax.
Yeah, for sure. So Frax launched at the end of 2020, as you guys said, end of DeFi summer. We launched as a decentralized stablecoin, Frax, the dollar peg stablecoin. And as we grew over 2021, 2022, basically became like the second most like Lindy, liquid stablecoin after DAI in terms of like the decentralized space. And we expanded our vision to issuing currency. We call them M2 assets. So for people that don't know economics speak, M1 assets are basically like cash, or like if you think of crypto, they're like just BTC, raw BTC or ETH. And then M2 assets, they're the first hypothecated layer of the M1. So like for cash would be money market funds, right? So like everyone tries to get the treasury yield, but keep the money market funds liquid, right? For Ethereum, it's LSDs and recently LRTs, right? You try to keep it liquid and then get that additional layer of yield in terms of one layer of rehypothecated aspect. And so, for BTC, there's no native yield in BTC, but you might, let's say like WBTC is an M2 asset because it's an issued note of BTC. So Frax expanded to having Frax Ether, a top 5 LSD, and soon in the V2 version, LRT support. So much higher yields, keeping it at the top of the kind of M2, the yielding stablecoin kind of LSD game. And recently, to complete our vision entirely, we launched Fraxtal. So it's a modular rollup, which is probably the most exciting thing to talk about on a podcast named The Rollup. So the idea behind that is if you think of Frax as kind of a decentralized central bank, the monetary policy levers, the balance sheet, the protocol owned liquidity, the stability mechanisms, the credit facility, like the Fraxlend system that we've built, the CDPs, they'll eventually all live on Fraxtal. So as the currencies are issued on multiple chains, right, as more places need LSDs like Frax Ether, or as they need dollar peg decentralized stablecoins and yielding dollar peg stablecoins like SFrax, right, as those grow, the assets that back them and the over collateralized loans that need to happen to mint these, or the AVSs and LRT restaking systems that need to be deployed, we're going to consolidate those onto Fraxtal. The smart contracts, the assets, the balance sheet, the transparency will live on Fraxtal. So this kind of central bank chain with its unique technology, with its unique incentives to build on top of, will grow as a function of the currency issue that grows on all these different chains. So that's the vision, the decentralized central bank, and we're growing every day. So it's been really fun.
Very cool. And like kind of in that lead up, you mentioned that M1 is inherently cash. Now, when I think of stablecoins, I kind of think of them as like the cash of decentralized finance. Why do you consider Frax the stablecoin an M2 asset?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So like basically, there's basically, if you divide economically stuff into the base money, right, and then the one layer hypothecated money, you'll basically see like the M2 assets are usually yielding. This is not like a hard coded rule. Like I was saying, WBTC, there's no Bitcoin yield. It's one layer hypothecated though. But it allows new utility, right? Programmability. And so, the main thing is basically like, we think that on chain, there will have to be good risk adjusted yield for dollar pegged assets, right? There will be, RWA, like basically tokenized T-bills, money market funds, right, that distribute this yield. There will be stuff like SFrax, which is the yielding system for Frax, and there's SDAI. People are familiar with it. If we go really deep into it, and there's Athena as well. Can't forget about them. They're very new, hot place of the carry trade yield. If we think about the design that we've built with SFrax and Frax, we're pretty confident it'll be the best risk-adjusted yield over the long term. The way that SFrax works is that it has like a utilization curve. So the more Frax gets staked in the SFrax vault, the lower and lower the yield goes, but it bottoms out at the risk-free rate of the Fed, the money market fund rate, right? The T-bill rate, because that's pretty much infinitely scalable as much as the Fed can scale, which is the issuer of the dollar, right? So if you hold SFrax, essentially, you can think of it as you get the IORB rate, the interest on reserve balances of the Federal Reserve, but you can also get a much higher rate. Like right now, there's 25% APY on SFrax, and that's higher than SDAI and Athena. It's dependent on how much of the supply of Frax is doing other things, right, like in liquidity pools versus how much of it is getting yield. But the system that we've designed, I think, is the best for like essentially bringing really good risk-adjusted yield to DeFi layers, whether it's on Ethereum mainnet, which it's already been a big success, on Fraxtal soon, but also on these other chains, right? And so the way that we've designed it is, how can we get M2 yield to other chains the best as possible? How can we get Ethereum M2 yields, which was LSDs. Now it's a little bit more LSDs plus LRT yield, which is why the V2 version of our Frax Ether will include that. And the idea is expanding the M2 yield everywhere, right? Getting it in as many places. The ubiquitous vision here should be any chain you are in, and you guys probably know this better than anyone, but there will be thousands of them, right? In terms of rollups, L2s, L3s, Alt L1s. Any chain you're in, you should have a very high chance of interacting with some Frax asset, whether it's like the biggest one or like the one that powers yield or the LSD of the chain. Frax is like a brand or a protocol, should be ubiquitous, whether you build on Fraxtal, the rollup, or you're on any other chain. That's the vision. Anywhere you go, you should see it. You should be able to rely on it. You should be able to see the Lindy that Frax is already, about 3, close to 4 years old, and it's thankfully, knock on wood, never has had a security incident. No one's like lost money depositing directly in Frax smart contracts, and that all of that will just add up when you can see that Lindy with the risk adjusted yield.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple pretty interesting points there, and I think this kind of is why you're getting to this Fraxtal end game here for Frax, because you've kind of got all these different pockets of Frax assets and effectively utility for users in terms of DeFi yields and capital efficient opportunities for people to operate in. And I remember in 2020, I was thinking like, man, I wonder when we're going to be settling consistently in yield bearing assets. And I think that we're getting closer and closer there. We have, native yield chains. You've got these yield routes and bridges and stablecoins that are natively generating yield, LRTs. This Ethereum staking yield has now kind of become this base yield. And so you at Frax Finance have all these different moving parts kind of happening. And you guys have decided, look, we need to kind of get into our own block space. We need to basically own our execution environment and kind of operate in this sovereign way. We don't just want to have to be doing this on other chains, although that we want to be on all these chains. We kind of want like a central like hub, if you will, for Frax. I'm curious on kind of some of the technical stuff, and we can dive into Fraxtal as well and kind of the scaling design. But what were some of the reasons why you thought that, hey, look, I think we need to build our own chain, and this is going to be advantageous to us from a revenue perspective, a business perspective, or just a general like running a protocol perspective?
Definitely. And it's a really good question, because a lot of people, when they, think of Frax as like a decentralized central bank, they're like, oh, okay, well, you issue assets everywhere. Why do you need a chain? You can just, deploy the smart contracts on other chains that have smart contracts, right? So it's actually, I think, probably the most common question. So the answer here is actually our vision and our view is like in a world 5 years from now, when there's thousands, maybe tens of thousands of rollups, any basically large distribution protocol will want to have basically their central location to actually have their collateral, their balance sheet, their monetary policy. Like, for example, we do expect to see stuff like Maker Chain, which is already announced, right? And so, like, even though it hasn't been deployed, I think we'll see something like that. Even though, for example, Aave hasn't announced that there's going to be an Aave chain, I would not be surprised that in the future, if the central place to do those kinds of monetary policy activities is announced there. And so, Fraxtal, just to go over the super quick, the unique tech, but also how it works, is a modular rollup. So the execution environment's OpStack. So it's actually superchain compatible. We're one of the inaugural superchain participants, along with Base, Mode, Linea, Op Mainnet, and more and more getting added every day. The execution environment being OpStack has some modifications. So the gas is Frax Ether, our LSD token, and basically the DA is modified, so it can actually fan DA out to multiple places, so that even if blob costs are like high, you could push it to Celestia. Nice shirt, by the way. I'm a big fan of Celestia and all the guys there. And so, or you can move it to Near. One thing we're exploring with the Near team is Near DA compatibility. So Fraxtal can actually be the cheapest location roll up, no matter what the actual demand for DA is. So like right now, swaps are like 1 cent or under, but even if blob costs and L1 costs go extremely high, that's the modular framework. We've modified it so that you can actually, in real time, the sequencer node can actually push DA to different locations. And we also have an L3 heavy roadmap, which we call Fractal Scaling, which is where the Fraxtal name comes from. And the idea behind that is, as I was saying, I think a lot of dApps will actually start out life as a dApp that's deployed to a close relationship rollup. And as the dApp becomes big, and hopefully, a lot of the dApps that we see deploying on Fraxtal will become very, very big, they will think about either having their own L2 or L3, right? And we actually want to encourage that. The way we've set up our Fraxtal Points incentives, the way that we've set up our community grants and investments and these kind of things, we actually embrace that rather than try to keep all of the, dApps from launching their own chain. So one thing with Fraxtal is that we have an L3 heavy roadmap, meaning that no matter how you want to launch an L3, whether you want to use Arbitrum framework, OP, or ZK EVM, or all these other ones that are coming out, you can be an L3 under Fraxtal and get rewarded Fraxtal points based on the amount of DA block space and TVL in your L3 bridge. The system that we've designed called Flocks basically rewards any smart contract based on both TVL and gas usage and popularity. So it's a holistic picture of a vision for building a chain that embraces people building on the chain as an ecosystem and rewarding them, and actually encourages and helps if people want to launch an L3 and take their dApp and actually do what Frax did, right? Frax originally was on Ethereum mainnet. It now has its own network in Fraxtal, and it's hopefully going to be one of the largest L2s that are systematically important. And we want to actually help everyone that wants to build on Fraxtal do that kind of dApp and app cycle to app chain timeline. I actually talked about it recently on a Bankless a few weeks back with David, where he actually brought up this tweet by John Charbonneau that was like the life cycle of like a big dApp. And I think it was made as a joke, but it's like astutely good, which is like you start off with an app on like a general compute chain. You're like, wow, I'm really huge. Modular expansion is awesome. So let me just launch my own chain, right? My modular rollup. And then you want to open up the rollup for everyone else to build on, right? So it becomes a general purpose chain because that's smart contracts. Anyone can build anything, right? And then so a bunch of apps deploy on it, and they're like, some of them are super successful, right? So some of the dApps starting, they're like, I'm a really big dApp. I should think about launching my own chain. So you end up back up here, the app launches app chain, and then they're like, hey, everyone build on top, and the cycle goes on and on. And so I think that embracing that and encouraging people to build stuff like that in that way is good. So like, for example, there's certain other chains that I think, they might be thinking about it in terms of like negative sum, where it's like build on our chain. Don't go and build your own chain, right? Like build on it to like, so you keep paying us like block space fees or whatever, or however they want to, measure their KPIs, TVL on the chain or something. But the positive sum way is to encourage the actual life cycle that everything is going towards, like this natural evolution of blockchain and dApps. And so Frax is uniquely positioned to do that because we can do, protocol and liquidity as a big stablecoin issuer. So like, let's say you're like a perp project, you want to deploy on Fraxtal because it's close to the central bank where the assets are and where the liquidity is and the levers on monetary policy is, and you become a huge perp, thing because you have liquidity. We can give you incentives. So there's Fraxtal points. You can distribute those to your users. And then let's say you want to be an L3 or something, right? You want to have your own chain, even like AVO or DYDX or something. Well, the cool thing is that's great. We would encourage you to do that. We would make sure that Frax assets are native on that chain in day one. If it's an L3, right, as like a fractal of Fraxtal, then it happens immediately, right? We can bring the same protocol and liquidity, same incentives natively, right, without any bridge risk, right down to your L3 immediately. And then you can basically do exactly what you do best, developing perps and all this stuff. So you could do that with any other types of things. So like if you have a game and then eventually you want to gamify chain, for example, but you want your assets and your items to be like really good yielding stablecoins, natively safe stablecoins, we can do that. And so it's a good positive sum vision for like how the crypto space will evolve in the next couple of years. And we're already seeing a lot of people build. And then the first few L3s are actually have expressed interest in working with us. So maybe in the next couple weeks, we'll have some cool announcements there as well.
Sweet. Very good overview kind of the modular stack that you guys are building. So let's kind of dive into each part of these. Let's start with, okay, so we have this fractal scaling inspired by this kind of Mandelbrot. I know Rob wants to talk about that. Let's talk about this idea of the incentivizations for each of these L3s, as well as kind of how they interact with the base layer of Frax L2, and kind of what the incentives are to build within Frax and earn these Fraxtal points with your block space incentives, and kind of how that works from a user and a builder's perspective.
Yeah, for sure. So first thing is our points distribution system, Fraxtal Points, are pretty unique. We call it block space incentives, or flocks for short. And the idea behind it is actually it's inspired by Google's PageRank algorithm. So like if you guys remember way back when people were trying to figure out which websites are reputable, they saw which other websites linked into a specific website. And then later you could recursively look at, how reputable is that website that's linking into this, because other websites hopefully link into that, right? So we developed this algorithm that's actually run with the chain software. It's always running block by block. And the idea is it's like EIP 1559, which decides how much ETH is burned, but instead of deciding how much things are burned, it decides how much Fraxtal points to give out every single block. And the algorithm is based on how popular a contract is, based on the total amount of users that use it, the total amount of gas historically throughout the chain. And it becomes really, really expensive and difficult to game, unlike a lot of the other chains that have like airdrop farmers and stuff, because what you get actually incentivized and rewarded for is by having a popular contract that the sum total of other users have used the vast majority of gas on the actual chain. So it's like this recursive system of like, if everyone's using your contract, or like, large sum of users are using your contract, and the vast majority of gas is used on your contracts, right? Like a high proportion of the total network, your contract is reputable. Like it's kind of like backlinking to a contract, right? It's like the activity across everything is kind of like a ton of backlinks, so to speak. And you actually get a lot of Fraxtal points based on that. And the cool thing is that's not a gas rebate, right? You can get thousands of X times more rewards this way because it's so hard to game than, a gas rebate, right? Like, so gas rebate systems, in my opinion, especially on rollups that are super cheap, they don't really move the needle, right? Like if you're as popular as Uniswap, right? Like if you look at Uniswap's router, might make like $5,000 of gas, like $10,000 of gas, like a day that you could refund. But Uniswap on its own layer for fees can make millions of dollars a day, right? So the economics don't make sense. But if you're the most popular smart contract or set of smart contracts on Fraxtal, you could get hundreds of thousands of dollars of worth of, future Fraxtal points delegated and then sent to your contract a day. Now that is a pretty big deal, right? And then you can start earning these over time. And as your contracts get more and more reputable, it's like memory in the chain, right? Like that's the reputation of each contract. It's almost like I was talking to Tarun from Gauntlet about this because he really liked this system. And he was like, it's kind of like a social graph for smart contracts. No one's really kind of built a chain where as more and more of it is used, you get a better and better social graph of like popular protocols and smart contracts, right? So it actually, over time, it even gets more and more accurate and more difficult to game. So that's the incentive system that's novel that we've built. And then if you think about it, it just is so general, whether you're like an L3, right? And your L3 is like the inbox contract is on Fraxtal. If it's the most popular, L3 contract and it's like the 10th, 5th, or whatever, third most used contract, you get tons of Fraxtal points for having one of the most popular L3s. And you could decide whether to use that as revenue or, incentivize your own users. If you deploy a dApp, right? then that's great too. If you're, if you're like the Uniswap of Fraxtal or like the perps of Fraxtal, you also get these Fraxtal points. And the motivation for us was basically to make it as general, transparent, and well designed, so that it's possible for any kind of builder, whether you're doing an L3, a dApp, a NFT set, or whatever, like a highly used token, to get the rightful amount of rewards that they deserve. So that's the incentive system. Super unique. I think a lot of people will probably be motivated to take parts of it for their own airdrops or snapshots or something. But the cool thing with this is, for us, it's always running. It'll always run years over time, block by block, just like how EIP 1559 is running. Literally every block is part of the chain's own rules. This should make Fraxtal more profitable, or just more useful to deploy on when you're considering like 10 different, super chains, roll-ups, L1s, and these kinds of things, right? Because you'll always get this proportional to how popular your dApp is, right? So if you're thinking, should I be a popular dApp on this L2 or Fraxtal, you'll know, like, just by existing on Fraxtal, like just every block that people use your thing, you're just getting more and more points. Those will be worth something, and then that tail emission will go for years, right? It won't stop. It's not like a campaign or like an airdrop and then it ends and stuff. That's part of the distribution of all of the Fraxtal points. So we designed this general purpose system, and that's why we think it'll have a really cool fractal scaling system. So people can build, for example, L3s that are privacy-centric payment solutions, right? Maybe you have a very specific, like ZK L3 that, you bridge Frax stablecoins or USDC, right? Anything, right? From Fraxtal, and then you can privately send it to anyone, right? And have payment settlement privately. And then the more people use it, the more you'll earn Fraxtal points, because like that's where your L3 contract resides, right? And you could do kind of anything. You could do GameFi. You can launch something like, Lens or Warpcast, like the new SocialFi stuff, and Farcaster and all these things, right? So that's the general idea, is to build this chain that's the decentralized central bank, but that has a generalized incentive layer. So for people to explore building on top and around it.
Navigating multiple blockchains can be complex and cumbersome. Let's say you want to deposit into a lending market on Polygon because they have the best rates, but you only have funds on Optimism. So you bridge your funds to Polygon only to realize that you need Matic to pay for gas. Maybe you use a centralized exchange, or you ask a friend to pay for the gas, but only then can you finish your transaction. In a chain abstracted future powered by Connext, this is not the situation. You can connect your wallet to any dApp from any chain with all the complexities of swapping, bridging, and depositing, all completely abstracted behind the scenes. Head over to connext.network, that's connext.network, to learn more about Connext's Chain Abstraction Toolkit. Pretty specific question. If I first start off with a dApp, just a smart contract application on Fraxtal, and I generate some user base, and I generate some Flox points, and then I go and I launch an app chain and kind of like continue this prophecy of the app chain lifecycle, would I lose the continuity of the user base and the points that I generated as an app when I go launch that L3?
No, actually, because first of all, your dApp's smart contracts will continue to carry their rank, right? So the cool thing about that is the rank is like memory, right? And it's like on chain, and that score will be there in the graph. And it kind of, I guess, depends on, probably you'll leave the dApp running, I assume, but even if you don't, you can then bring over the rank and the actual demand to the L3 contract, right? You can actually delegate that to the L3 contract. So you can actually, there is continuity and also just memory. It's a rank that stays with the contracts.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it is a good time to like get into like the whole fractal scaling vision. Like I can just kind of introduce the Mandelbrot set a little bit, because this was something that I found on like my mathematical journey that I found fascinating, which is basically this idea of like infinite scale. And if you dive in infinitely or you zoom out infinitely, you're still going to end up at this Mandelbrot set type of visualization. And so I think it is a really, really, again, fascinating visual to think about an L3 that could potentially outgrow its L2 and in one sense, but then still kind of contribute back to the L2 in a means of distribution. And so I kind of want to let you make that bridge to the blockchain scalability side of it. But I encourage like anyone who's curious about this stuff to go look at like anything on the Mandelbrot set. There's a great like mathematical YouTuber, 3 Blue 1 Brown, who does a great video on this and basically describes like how this set is constructed, and how you can kind of zoom into the decimal places. You'll end up revisiting the same visual set of points and graph that you found on the integer number line. And so this is just a perfect analogy for like an L1 zooming all the way into L2, 3, 4, 5. As far as like, how did when you're thinking about fractal scalability, how do you picture that in general? And then I'm also curious, like just how incentives work when they start flowing back between like inner layers and outer layers. Generally, like what is this vision? How did you think about, how did you come up with this fractal scalability vision?
Yeah, and I love the Mandelbrot stuff because like that's the actual visual that we definitely want to give out. If you go to like frax.com, the whole vibe is basically this exact fractal scaling situation. And one thing I wanted to say, like that you said really well, it's quite possible that, you know, an L2 could be bigger in terms of both TVL and usage than an L1 or like Ethereum or something. Although people really don't like or sometimes get confused when they think that, or an L3 could be bigger than Fraxtal. Just because there's like numerical, like 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, doesn't mean that's the order of like the capped growth of, like you said, there's in fractals, there's other parts can expand and you end up on the same place on the graph. So, and this has actually been just a time immemorial thing everyone's discussed. I remember way back in 2018, people were like, is it possible for an ERC20 token to ever become larger market cap than Ethereum? And like that like broke some people's brains, right? It's like, well, now I think everyone thinks, well, yeah, of course, if the USDC could issue like 500 billion USDC, that doesn't mean Ethereum will break. That doesn't mean like the validators have less at stake or something. It might have some, you know, interesting things at the margin, but like, before they used to break people's brain, right? They thought like, oh, an ERC20 token must mean that it can't ever get bigger than the L1 token. But you're totally right. And this is actually why we tried to make like the incentive system so like general, so it can just work no matter like how popular an L3 is. Like there could be like an L3, like if it's a payments L3 that's with privacy and stuff, it could have 1 million times more transactions than Fraxtal, you know, right? Like, and so the main thing that's important is just, does it have the DA and the enshrined bridge, and where does that work, right? And I think now in the modular landscape, those things can like move around, right? Like the DA can be on Celestia, the enshrined bridge and fork choice rule can be to ETH or, you know, to Fraxtal if it's an L3, but all of those things mean different things, different features, different functionality, which is kind of why we also have the DA module that can move around where the DA is posted. So basically, I invite anyone that's interested in building to know like there's no like cap or limit to how big something can get on like Fraxtal or under Fraxtal or above Fraxtal, or like, you know, as a L2 that has a direct feature set or something like that. One cool thing though is a currency issuer, right? As like a decentralized central bank, is like if Frax's currencies on different chains get used so much, like let's say in like 3-4 years, Frax, the dollar peg stablecoin, has like 200 billion, you know, supply. So like a 200 billion balance sheet. That does actually translate to, at minimum, somewhere around 200 billion value of TVL and liquidity on Fraxtal, because again, like our goal is eventually to have the balance sheet, the loans, the over collateralized CDPs, the credit facility, the redemptions on Fraxtal. So one cool relationship that does stay intact is the minimum amount of utility and TVL and everything on Fraxtal is proportional to the sum total of like Frax asset usage across all these other chains. So that's always a cool equation that I try to follow, keep track of.
Let's definitely dig deeper into that because there is a lot to unpack when it comes to the value accrual to Frax assets and the asset layer in general. And then as well, like these programmable monetary mechanisms that you can pull, these levers that you can pull sort of across not just Fraxtal, but like multiple other blockchains and rollups because you have Frax assets on there. Before we get into that, I want to tell you a quick meme and just curious what you think about it. Okay, it goes like this. All blockchains, including L1s, are rollups on Circle CCTP.
I didn't know you were a stablecoin maximalist. So that's a great meme because I like to brand myself as the world's first stablecoin maximalist, which is, Frax started as a stablecoin. And the reason for that is like, I was just thinking, what's the biggest, market opportunity and interesting area in crypto? And I was like, well, stablecoins are $1 trillion industry, right? The only other $2 trillion industries, in my opinion, is Bitcoin, like the asset, the digital gold, and Ethereum, like the first, fully Turing complete, L1. And then, stablecoins, I think, are the third $1 trillion category. So it's interesting you say that because I've thought about it a lot. I think issuing your own currency, your own liability that people use as money gives you disproportionately powerful say in fork choice rules, just overall and everything. I don't know if it a lot of people think, oh, well, like Circle can signal, if there's a hard fork or if like certain EIP will pass or not. I think that the incentives aren't there. And if even if they signal the wrong one, people can just redeem, right? And so I think that might be a little bit exaggerated, but I am a stablecoin maximalist. And what I mean by that is that I think stablecoin issuers have a disproportionate say, more than what people actually think about in terms of how people behave on a certain chain. Some signal on fork choice rule, but also just overall, everyone's debt is denominated in stable coins, right? You either owe Tether, DAI, Frax, these things. If you have or USDC or something, if you take a loan on Aave, Fraxlend, Spark or something. So it's really important to actually think about those things, right? I would say I'm a stablecoin maximalist, and that by the way, that doesn't mean so. Bitcoin maximalist is where the term comes from, which means they think everything is a scam, right? And so that's not at all the connotation of that. And there's also Ethereum maxis and stuff, although I think they're a little bit more respectful because they're at least bought into the idea there will be a ton of other tokens, right? BTC maxis are the absolute worst because they're every other token, if it exists, is a scam and the beyond saving. But stablecoin maximalist actually is the most positive sum because it actually considers all of the tokens that should exist and do exist, considers Bitcoin and Ethereum as $1 trillion opportunities and everything, and their right place. However, it says that stable coins, particularly just tokens that are pegged to a certain thing, mostly dollars, obviously, because everyone's accounting these days is in dollars, but it doesn't even have to be. It's just things that have a stable peg to some expectation are the largest opportunity on chain for protocol, monetization, revenue, as well as having a disproportionate say in the financial layer of a system.
We did a podcast with Chao Wang, and he kind of described these two use cases that have gotten product market fit. And they're kind of on either end of a barbell. One of them is payments, and you can see this on Tron. Stablecoin payments are the number one use case, and its own kind of just frenzy, if you will, mania. There's a lot of activity, a lot of usage there. And then the second was speculation, but I want to just kind of like tweak that a little bit and say rehypothecation, because I think on one end you have these stablecoin payments. There's really nothing like too like exotic going on there. On the speculation and the rehypothecation side, again, stablecoins are sort of just a rehypothecation, but then you can do all these programmable and very like flavorful things with them. And so I think stablecoin maxis are both at both ends of the spectrum, like have gotten product market fit on both the very exotic side as well as the very vanilla side. And there's a lot of adoption and demand for both of those. And that's just a shout out to the stablecoin maxis out there.
Yeah. And like, yeah, you said it really well. And I think another rule that, that kind of drew me to stablecoin maximalism is that I think everything kind of converges at large enough size into either trying to issue their own stablecoin. Doesn't mean they'll succeed, obviously, but basically saying like, okay, currency issuance, right? Central banking essentially is like the most lucrative $1 trillion opportunity again, right? And so like you could see Aave, right? They launched Go, Curve launched CRV USD. You have this fork in the road, no pun intended and stuff. So to choose between whether your protocol is like a service, right? You take fees and like bips and a small amount of fees across like, if you're Aave, like, other lenders or something like that, or if you're an AMM, like some admin fee or something like Curve, or like if you're a perps, system, like just some fees on trading or something, or you're actually a stablecoin issuer, and then your stability mechanism is the thing that you built, like your AMM or your like lending protocol, like it's your credit facility, or like in Curve, it's your very novel way of liquidating stuff in deep liquidity, right? And so kind of stablecoin maximalism says like, if you get big enough, the only like final frontier to capture from like, billions of dollars up to like the $1 trillion mark is if you issue a stable coin and then you try to get, for example, as big as like Tether and like keep growing and stuff like that. Like you could kind of see this evolution, right? Aave was like, hey, we're not making a lot of money. Lenders are like just depositing USDC and all this stuff, but we are the lending like market on chain. We have the most distribution for where debt gets created. If only we could just mint our own money that people could take out of Aave and then use as cash, that would be 100 times X more profitable, right? Because all the interest would go back to the Aave DAO and everything. Obviously, it's really hard to launch a stablecoin. That's the other thing. Is like you have to know how to do proper stability mechanisms, transparency and balance sheet, risk assessment, and people barely know how to do Oracle, proper Oracle settings and stuff in lending markets. So it's an extremely lucrative and important area, but it's a very, very hard area to get right. That's why I think Lindy and reputation and brand of a protocol is pretty much the most valuable, right? Like I would say Frax is probably the second after DAI. DAI is older than Frax a little bit. So they have the most in terms of decentralized yield and like people know like this thing does not get hacked, or if it does, it's such an old protocol with a good treasury, good team behind it. And then same thing with Frax now is like the second most, reputable decentralized stablecoin protocol, LSD system and all this stuff. People know we're not going anywhere. We're very long-term oriented. And so like, if you see some yield on SFrax or like Frax Ether or something, the risk assessment is not like, is this yield worth potentially getting rugged or like getting hacked to zero and then never seeing my value again or something, right? It's more like, oh, is it worth the opportunity cost of like somewhere else, right? And so that's how you build the value that you can actually continue building out your currency issuance protocol.
They left this part out of the app chain lifecycle diagram. It doesn't have the part where it has a fork in the road and it's either turn on a fee or it's launch your own stablecoin. They just left that out. of the
I need
entire
to
life
talk to
cycle.
John. I need to talk to John Sharvado, who made that tweet, and be like, hey, like the last part is like after you launch the chain, you'd be like, we need to launch stablecoin or like LSD or something.
Let's go into these stability mechanisms and some of these mechanisms that you can pull on Fraxtal, but actually have far-reaching implications on blockchains around, inside, all over, beyond Fraxtal. So, like, you know, Frax is in flight on several blockchains, and all of the stability mechanisms, all of these algorithmic controls you host on Fraxtal. So talk us through like what happens when you pull a lever on Fraxtal, whether it's the lend or it's when you pull one of those levers, what happens to Frax assets on these different chains?
Yeah, like that's a good question. So right now, actually, since we just launched Fraxtal, a decent amount of them is still on mainnet, but things are moving to Fraxtal every week. The way that it works is like the big stability mechanisms are the credit facility / CDP, as some people call it, on Fraxlend, which is our endogenous basically system for over collateralized lending. Protocol owned liquidity through AMOs that we actually invented kind of in the last bull market, which is you have assets and you deploy them to like curve pools, like blue chip AMM places. And so people can swap Frax against like, USDC if that's on the balance sheet, or USDP or PYUSD. Like we have a good relationship with Paxos and PayPal. We have an RWA system where they distribute some of the yield back to the Frax protocol. Those things living on Fraxtal means that as there's more demand, for example, on like for Frax on another chain, people will want to bridge it, over there, right? Like if the people want SFrax or normal Frax, they'll have to get it from somewhere, right? And the most likely place once everything is on Fraxtal is they'll have to either mint it or they'll have to buy it on AMMs. Like Curve is already deployed on Fraxtal, Balancer's thinking of deploying other places, like Raw is a new AMM on Fraxtal as well. So people will actually go to Fraxtal to actually pull these decentralized levers. Like we don't obviously pull them. Like I don't have the keys to actually pull them. The whole thing is that they're stability mechanisms, and people will pull them themselves because the economics of it actually makes sense for them to do so. And the reverse is true as well. If there's not a lot of Frax demand or it's shrinking, people will want to bring it back to Fraxtal, get $1 worth of collateral and arb it and make sure that the Frax stablecoin is at peg. That's why I was saying that the unique relationship between Frax assets and Fraxtal is that as those currencies grow everywhere, so will activity on Fraxtal, so will like liquidity on Fraxtal, so will the basically the desirability to actually build on Fraxtal, because there's all these liquid places. And so soon, for example, we can say as Frax grows a lot, hey, if you're like an RWA system, like we're talking to Ondo, we're talking to Agora, a few other protocols. If you want to be backing a Frax, because we're a huge stablecoin, issue natively on Fraxtal, we will intake your asset. We'll actually deploy protocol and liquidity, which is good for them, right? And so the redemptions and stuff can happen on Fraxtal. You'll get a lot of usage. People can build on top of it. And so this equation of, how much Frax M2 assets are everywhere else and how much utility, TVL, liquidity, and transactions and building happens on Fraxtal is really cool, that it always proportionally kind of follows.
Cool. And so kind of as we come to a close here, we've got this broader vision of what you're calling the singularity. And, we've got some weeks ahead. There's tons of development happening in the modular space in the weeks ahead. You guys have some L3s launching, some interesting applications coming on board. What is the singularity from here on out? And kind of how do you get there in this new kind of modular roadmap that you have?
Yeah, so I wrote the Singularity roadmap, and the name is like kind of to unify all aspects of that we're building at Frax into one kind of global mission. There's a lot of cool parts of it. Like one, like you said, we have this program for the first 23 L3s. We will not only invest, bring protocol and liquidity, but also additional Fraxtal Points grants and everything. But basically, there's a lot of unique things that we want to do as part of this roadmap. Another thing that wasn't actually on the roadmap that I'll announce here is in the next week, we're announcing a really huge Fraxtal hackathon with like probably, we'll see exactly how much, but like 8 figures of like prizes and investments and everything, especially with support from our Frax investors and backers and VCs. And so we want call for L3s, for dApps on Fraxtal, all of these things, and we'll support them with a ton of both investments, grants, prizes, and everything. And the idea with that is basically to kickstart the Singularity roadmap, which is getting Fraxtal to be a huge L2, getting the TVL to increase as Frax assets are growing on different chains, and then also fostering 23 L3s. That sounds like an interesting number. Some people are like, so like the Michael Jordan of L3s. But the reason we landed on that number was because we want to make sure that we support the right number, and we don't say, oh, there's going to be thousands of L3s on Fraxtal or something, because that's not only impersonal, but it doesn't seem like people will be like, oh, okay, I'll consider it later. But we want to make sure to work closely with every builder that's in this kind of inaugural cohort, and eventually, obviously, there will hopefully be hundreds and thousands in the coming years. But if you want to work directly with the Frax team, if you want to build some really cool DeFi primitives or like a payments L3 or your own type of experimental L3, and you want to talk incentives, investment, and being in one of those 23 spots, I think the first 2 is probably taken after they announce it and stuff. But there's obviously a bunch of spots left, but I think by the end of this year and the next couple months, hopefully most of those will be taken. So there's a lot of cool stuff coming in the roadmap, as well as the hackathon that's going to be announced next week.
Love it, Sam. It's been awesome to see your progression throughout crypto. I mean, it's been from kind of DeFi to different iterations as the ecosystem matured, now kind of chain, and then now empowering builders. It's almost like your own full circle, man. And so excited to continue to see the growth, and appreciate you coming on today and sharing your thoughts on fractal scaling. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me, and hopefully be on soon. Always fun to chat.
Already looking forward to the next one. Thanks, Sam.